Today, at the conclusion of his historic two-day summit on global nuclear security, President Obama offered a pretty optimistic assessment of what was accomplished.
And because of the steps we've taken as individual nations and as an international community, the American people will be safer and the world will be more secure. Our work today not only advances the security of the United States, it advances the security of all mankind.
The work that President Obama is talking about is the ambitious goal laid out in this summit of securing all of the world's loose nuclear material within 4 years. Not just American pledge, but a world pledge. This two-day summit, which officially wrapped up today, involved 49 leaders from around the world. Among them, the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, who President Obama met with on Sunday. In the 1970s and 1980s, South Africa, of course, was under the control of an apartheid government, which aspired very much to be a nuclear power. During those 2 decades, South Africa reportedly built 7 atomic bombs. After the apartheid government lost power in South Africa in the 90s, the new government there abandoned their nuclear ambitions. They dismantled their bombs. But they maintained their research reactors. One of them is called Pelindaba. It's located just north of the South African capital of Johannesburg. Pelindaba was supposedly going to be the model for the rest of the world for how you can safely operate a nuclear facility that holds lots of dangerous nuclear material. Officials at Pelindaba would actually do training sessions for other countries to show everybody how it's done in terms of keeping this stuff secure. And then something happened. Just after midnight, November 8th, 2007, the Pelindaba nuclear facility was broken into by 4 armed gunmen. As 60 Minutes documented, a year later, the 4 men breached a 10,000-volt electrical fence. They advanced past security cameras undetected. They walked 3/4 of a mile to Pelindaba's emergency control center and got inside. The gunmen broke into that control center. They grabbed a laptop and they shot a security guard in the chest. While that group of gunmen was in the control center, a second group of gunmen on the other side of the facility cut through an outer fence and opened fire on another guard. At the time of that attack, Pelindaba had about 25 atomic bombs worth of weapons-grade uranium on hand. Ultimately, the gunmen never got to that uranium. They ditched the laptop, they fled on foot, and they got out the way they came in. This break-in is still unsolved, still totally unexplained 2.5 years later. Nobody knows who did it or why. But Pelindaba was supposed to be the best of the best in terms of keeping this material safe. And it turns out the best of the best was woefully inadequate. These guys got all the way into the control room. Anywhere highly enriched uranium exists anywhere in the world, its safety is a risk. And so good on our government for wanting to collect it from all the places it is all around the world. That said, we sort of have our own nuclear mishaps here, too.
I mean, you'll recall that we had a little incident a while back where we had nuclear-tipped missiles on a bomber flying across the United States and nobody knew about it.
That little incident he's talking about there happened back in 2007. 6 nuclear warheads were mistakenly flown on a B-52 bomber from an Air Force base in North Dakota to one in Louisiana. And it's not just that oops. This past January, the Air Force removed an entire squadron that had been overseeing a bunker of nuclear warheads in New Mexico. Last fall, another nuclear weapons lab in New Mexico suffered from a number of major security lapses involving classified information. Despite our own history of not exactly handling nuclear material correctly, the U.S. is now taking the lead role in collecting the rest of the world's dangerous nuclear byproducts. And it's neat that we're trying to clean this stuff up. And it is neat that we have lots of confidence in our own ability to protect this stuff. But isn't it a little awkward that before starting this whole diplomatic overture to the rest of the world, President Obama announced his intention to build a whole bunch of new nuclear plants in this country? As part of his comprehensive energy plan, we're about to build a bunch of new nuclear reactors for the first time in my lifetime. One of the things that nuclear reactors make is highly enriched uranium. So while we're asking the rest of the world to ditch their highly enriched uranium, we're going to be producing more of this stuff than ever before. Here to tell me to chill out and stop making good news into bad news is the great and good Joe Cirincione, president of the Plowshares Fund. He's also the author of Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. Joe also met with President Obama today after the summit was over. Mr. Cirincione, thank you for coming back on the show.
My pleasure, Rachel.
Talk me down here. All this highly enriched uranium that other countries around the world have, is it clear that we ought to be bringing this stuff back to the U.S., that we can handle it here?
Yes, it is clear. We know what to do with this, and what we do is down-blend it. We take the highly enriched uranium, we put it together with low-enriched uranium, we make fuel rods out of it, and we sell it at a profit, actually, to American power companies. In fact, 1 out of every 10 light bulbs in the United States is lit with fuel that comes from former Soviet warheads, warheads that used to threaten our destruction that are now blended down into fuel for the reactors. Highly enriched uranium is the easiest material to get rid of.
As somebody, though, who has spent your career on the issue of nuclear weapons and nuclear materials, the threat that these things pose, do you feel at all worried? Do you feel there's any awkwardness, any contradiction at all about having President Obama recommit America to nuclear power at the same time that we're committing ourselves to collecting nuclear material around the globe?
Nuclear power has lots of problems with waste and cost and safety, but it's not the reactor themselves that causes the proliferation risk. It's the factories that can enrich uranium to low levels for fuel, which is what goes into the reactors. Low enriched uranium can also be used for high enriched uranium. They can become a bomb factory. That's the whole issue with Iran. So the question is, can you make an international mechanism that can take those individual national facilities and make them multinational or international? That's part of Obama's plan. But let me tell you, this conference today, this summit, this historic event was about much more than fuel cycle reform. I met at this summit a young woman, Carrie Lamarck, whose mother died in 9/11. I told her I was coming on your show, and she said, tell them that what this summit was about was making sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else. That Osama bin Laden is trying to get a nuclear weapon. He wants to kill millions of Americans, and this summit was about preventing him from doing that. This was an absolutely remarkable event. I'm very pleased with the outcome. I think you saw the President of the United States in a remarkable display of power, bringing the rest of the world to Washington to carry out something that he wanted to do. This is not just good for him. This doesn't just tell you about his priorities. This is good for America.
Joe, in terms of people watching this right now who don't follow nuclear issues that closely, what's the most important thing to understand about what's different in the world after this summit than before the summit happened?
One, that you forged international recognition that nuclear terror is the #1 threat facing most countries. 2, that you have an action plan where these countries have committed to joint action. And 3, that they've agreed to come back in 2 years to hold themselves accountable, to do what the president has wanted them to do, what they have now pledged to do, to secure all loose nuclear materials in the world within 4 years. You do that, you stop Osama bin Laden. You do that, you prevent nuclear terrorism. You fail to do that, and one of the capitals represented at the summit today will go up in a mushroom cloud.
Joe Cirincione, president of the Plowshares Fund. It is always great and clarifying to talk to you. Thank you for your time tonight, Joe.
My pleasure, Rachel.